Hello, this is Julia Ellingbo for Indie Plus,
Hello.
and this is our Gaming as Other. And this afternoon, my guests are Kat Jones and Renee Knipe, and we're going to tell you about our characters. But before we do that, I have a couple of housekeeping things. First, please be aware that this event may include discussions about or descriptions of gender and race issues, and explicit and or abusive language. So cover your ears, just for a little bit. This event also upholds the Indie Plus community standards, and to find out more about those standards, Google for Indie Plus community standards. All right, so there's that part of the housekeeping, and now I want to introduce Kat and Renee. So starting with the person on my left, Kat, tell us about yourself. Welcome. This is your first Gaming as Other.
Yes. Thanks for having me. So I'm Kat Jones, and I am both a gamer and a game designer. I started gaming in college and really got into sort of the indie gaming scene. I've been working on a lot of live action scenarios. That's mostly what I write and design. And I've been helping out with the games on demand at Origins and Gen Con for the last few years.
Great. Thank you and welcome. And Kat and I have written games together too. Just
yes.
out there. And played a lot of games together. And Renee Knipe, this is my first time ever actually seeing you. That's not your picture. I've heard your voice and I've seen your picture, but now I have a combination of a video. And welcome, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm pretty. I hide from the Hangouts sometimes. So, but yeah, I'm also a gamer and game designer. I started. This is going to date me, but back in 1979 with. Is that right? Thereabouts, when my grandmother picked me up basic D&D, best grandmother ever, and that just never stopped for me. So, game design, a little bit of freelance writing of late, and I also helped out with games on demand the last couple years. In fact, Kat and I were roommates this past year at Gen Con. So,
excellent. Thank you both for saying yes to this fun and exciting topic that I know everybody actually wants to talk about. And that is, tell me about your character. So we're going to do things a little bit differently because as much as I would love to hear about everyone's characters and every little minute detail about what made them awesome, I want to focus the discussion a little bit about how those memorable characters can be examples of playing beyond stereotypes or out of our comfort zone or playing safe and playing fun, and also talk a little bit about how the social setting and the other players at the table and maybe even the game itself supported your having a great play experience and having a memorable character that you also always want to talk about whenever you play the game. So, let's start with Renee. Tell us about a memorable character.
well, okay. I said I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this, but we'll go right to the lack of comfort zone thing. So, a bunch of years ago, we were sitting around, and this is probably the best and single most memorable gaming experience of my life, really. We were playtesting Paul Sega's Baccano. And for those who don't know Baccano, it's kind of a shared storytelling game between all the participants where you basically try to tell a little piece of erotic fiction, and you're each trying to tell your own sort of little bit of erotica in the setting of a Greek city that's been overcome by Bacchus and his orgiastic throng, I suppose you would say. So it's a game that specifically invites you to sort of trust the people at the table, and you kind of have to do that implicitly. Anyway, so this was a time before I'd come out as trans. I was still living inauthentically, and for some reason, I don't know exactly when I decided I was going to do this, but I decided that my character was going to have a gender transition in the story, that I was explicitly going to tell a kind of erotica that I was somewhat familiar with, which was the forced feminization story. And I had this character who ran through the city of Greece looking for his fiancée who'd been separated from him, but the story was, as he was looking for his fiancée, he was actually becoming this woman that he was looking for. And it was scary. I mean, maybe not for everybody else at the table, but I was shaking as I was telling the story with each new scene that sort of came to me. And it became sort of the precipitating event for me coming out, because afterwards there were discussions about, where did you come up with this, and how did you tell it so convincingly? And it became a moment where I just decided to extend the trust of the game to my friends and explain to them what I was really feeling in my life. And it created a snowball event that I kind of attribute to everything that's happened after, including my own transition. So there you go. That's my kickoff.
That's excellent. That is a great kickoff. And thank you for sharing. I appreciate your hesitation at first in not wanting to say anything about it, and I'm glad that you did. So a question about the people at the table. How, other than being, it sounds like that also affected them. And what do you think helped your being able to play that close to yourself and reveal that much? How do you think the other players contributed to that?
Like any good gaming session with people that are into what's going on as an audience and not just focused on what they're doing, I was able to sort of introduce, because it's scene by scene, and the game specifically asks you to escalate the circumstances scene by scene. So I could start out with little bits and pieces of things, and when that received sort of positive response, you could kind of tell that people were interested in what was being said, and definitely curious, and there was positive reinforcement in the form of support. I mean, we were all being very vulnerable with our stories to begin with, so that shared vulnerability is also a thing. And little bit by little bit, it became easier through the mutual support offered by the game, and the audience and the people that were there, that this is something I can talk about, at least at this moment. So
cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's a well-designed game. Anybody that hasn't seen it. So.
Okay, say it one more time.
Baccano. Check it out. Paul Sega. He'll love me for plugging it. So.
Yay. Well, good. Thank you. So now back on the topic of sex, or to continue with the topic of sex. Kat, well, you don't have to, but go ahead. Because sex is always fun to talk about. Tell us about a great game experience, your favorite character, a good character, whether it has to do anything with sex. And unmute your microphone.
There we go. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what character I should talk about, because I have, obviously, as a gamer, I'm sure everybody has lots of memorable characters that they feel really strongly about. But when I was thinking about it, one of the things that really struck me was how much the other characters influenced the experience that I had with my particular characters. And that one of the things I love about gaming is that you create this character, which you have this idea about what they're going to be like and how they're going to behave, but then they have to interact with all of these other characters. and that can sort of take their story in a lot of different directions. And I think one of the games that does that particularly well is Monster Hearts, which is probably one of my favorite role-playing games. And I've played lots and lots of lots and lots of games of Monster Hearts. And I played a game of Monster Hearts with a group of undergrads at Grinnell College. And it was really different because it was the first time I played Monster Hearts with a group of people who had recently actually been teenagers. And I think it really shaped the dynamic of the game in this really interesting way. So my character was Sorrowful Clements. She was a ghoul. She had been tried as a witch in Salem, Massachusetts during the witch trials and had somehow been brought back from the dead in sort of 2014 Salem, Massachusetts. So she was sort of a fish out of water as a teenager with these sort of weird puritanical ideas and at the same time really sort of trying to go against that because she had been sort of brought back. She did it with a nefarious purpose. And so, yeah, she sort of wanted to take advantage of all the things that the modern era had to offer, but her friends were very protective of her in this way that I sort of wasn't expecting, and ended up really taking her on a much different path than she had sort of wanted to go down herself. So that was really interesting.
There we go. All right, I'm muting my microphone. So in contrast, what's interesting is that you were telling me earlier that in playing that game in Monster Hearts, there are and in Apocalypse World in general, there are these very explicit mechanics for sex, and they never got used in your game, in that particular game. And do you think it was, well, why? Do you think that was?
So part of it, I think, was, again, that these were players who were recently high school students. And so I think other sort of Monster Hearts games that I've played have really felt like a sort of a CW show where the sexual content is like not, I don't want to say not realistic, but there's this fantastical element, right? That you're watching these characters who are not really teenagers have these sexual experiences. And that I felt like there was a lot more of the sort of fumbling that went on where, you know, my character had a human boyfriend and they both wanted to have sex, but the two other characters sort of knew that this would be a terrible idea and sort of did what they could to sort of prevent that from happening in this way that felt to me like a very sort of real friendship situation, that it was like, you know, they think this would be a good idea, but we can see, I mean, it was, you know, they had this terrible relationship, and so the two other people sort of did what they could to, you know, make sure that they didn't do something that they were going to regret later, which I thought, again, felt very sort of, that was much more in keeping with my actual teenage experience than a lot of the other Monster Hearts games that I've played that have been, you know, that have had much more sexual content.
Yeah, I think I've played Monster Hearts with people who were, the youngest person I ever played was in her late 20s. And that was in a game that you and I played with all women. And in that one, we were playing, around the same time we were also playing a totally different Monster Hearts game. And the contrast between those two games, those two play groups was very, very striking and interesting. So in our group, it was all women, and we all kind of knew each other on different levels. We'd all sort of played some games before. I think I know the usual host the best, and I knew you really well, and then everyone else I was just sort of getting to know, and we played the meanest, cruelest girls ever. They were just so terrible to each other, and in I hate to say it, in a fun way. We had a high body count, much higher than the other game we were playing. There was plenty of sex. There was lots of violence, and I have to say it was the most comfortable game I've ever played in playing around in those fields. So then playing a game where like the character, I have to say the characters in the other game we're playing are, I think, well, at least two of them were very, 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 very memorable. And there were just things that I don't think at that table we ever could have brought up. But you go and you play Mean Girls with other women, and we absolutely could do awful and nice things. We were also charitable to each other. And it was an interesting contrast. And I remember afterwards, my character was, I played the vampire, and my good friend Rachel played the fae, and our characters had just they hated each other so much because it was, yeah, the hate was there. And after the game, and they eventually hated each other, that they kind of became really good friends. Which I have to say, I guess I've had in a high school experience too. But anyway, afterwards, a few months later, we were playing, Rachel and I were playing Dominion with her husband, and we were playing the Let Me Tell You About Our Characters. And he'd only heard little snippets about this game. And we started talking about our characters, and I said, you know what? I really didn't like how mean we were to each other, but it was awfully fun. And we had to have basically a debriefing. And we love each other, and there was no question about that ever. But it was just, there were times when I would leave her house just feeling like, ow, she was terrible. And come to find out, it was kind of mutual. So anyway, we are running out of time, and I want to give both of you a quick wrap up on what makes for a memorable game experience. And I want to start with Renee. You talked a little bit before the show about that you mostly run games, and so on that note, tell me a little bit about what for you do you do to make for a memorable experience for the players, as well as for yourself?
Gosh, I wasn't prepared for that question.
Oh.
No, I try to really key in on what the players are telling me is interesting to them, either stuff that they've brought to the table or stuff that I've brought to the table, and try to focus around that. There's just not much point in worrying about or spending a lot of time on things that people aren't interested in. And I focus on each player individually as much as possible to give everybody, as much of what they want as possible. So.
Sorry,
I was going to say you're muted.
I'm muted. And what was I going to ask you? Oh, do you ever use things like X cards or lines and veils, or just having a general conversation beforehand about what is okay and not okay, and then checking in throughout the game?
Sometimes, yes. To be honest, I've used the X card stuff at Gen Con mostly, or other gaming conventions, because of, obviously, it's a nice little tool when you don't know the people as well. But yeah. And I find it to be kind of freeing. Actually, I had a nice experience at Gen Con this past year where I decided that we were running Monster of the Week, and it was within my bounds as the MC to make a hard move on a player, and I decided it was his time to buy it, and so I narrated the death of that character, but I also pushed the X card at him as I did so, just in case he wanted to veto that particular move. And the great thing about that is I felt more free to make that suggestion for his character, knowing that he had the option to opt out of it. And that's what I've really loved about discovering, for example, the X card. He did opt out of it, actually. He didn't want his character to die, and that was a quick way for us to negotiate what we both wanted at the table out of that moment. So that hasn't translated as much into my local groups, but we're definitely able to discuss that stuff at the table very quickly because we're all pretty intimate with each other in the platonic sense of that word. So.
Great, thank you. And
Sure.
Kat, tell me about what you think makes for a memorable character, a memorable playing experience. I don't have a hook for you.
Okay, so I think a memorable character, for me, it's someone who has an interesting story arc. I think a lot of times the stereotype is like, oh, it's this character that like was really badass and like did all this stuff and saved the whatever. And for me, it's much more about, is this a character who develops over time, who learns something, who loses something, who changes in an interesting way, so that I feel like something happened to them that was really interesting, and maybe that I learned something about myself or about an issue that I'm interested in through that character. And yeah, I think for me, and I think that having a table where I feel like, I think we've all sort of talked about that. If you have a gaming group where you feel really comfortable being vulnerable, playing close to home, or playing, with things that might make you a little bit uncomfortable, or going, even, sort of going to that place where you can be sort of mean, that enriches the experience a lot, I would say. And feeling like people will communicate if you go too far, and let you know sort of what their comfort zone is. I think that really, the other players, I think, have so much of an impact on what experience I have with my character.
Great, thank you. It seemed like for the first part of that, I kind of lost you, but I think we got to the core important stuff. So thanks everybody for bearing with us as we figured out how to work the lovely internets. And please watch us again. Thank you, Renee and Kat, and I hope to talk to you guys soon. Although don't hang up just yet. Just wait, let me stop broadcasting. All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye.